The Kennedy half-dollar of 1973 stands as a fascinating chapter in American coinage history because it arrived during a period of economic uncertainty, cultural change, and shifting attitudes towards silver money and national symbolism. And to understand the importance of the 1973 Kennedy half-dollar, we must first look back to its origins, which trace directly to the tragic assassination of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy in November 1963. An event that shocked the United States and the entire world and led to an overwhelming public desire to memorialize the fallen president in a permanent and meaningful way. And as a result, the United States Mint moved with unprecedented speed to replace the Franklin half-dollar with a new design bearing the portrait of Kennedy. And by early 1964, the Kennedy half-dollar was born, quickly becoming one of the most emotionally powerful coins ever issued by the nation. And while the earliest Kennedy half-dollars were struck in high silver content, the composition of the coin began to change as silver prices rose and hoarding became widespread. And by the late 1960s, the Mint transitioned the half-dollar away from silver and into copper-nickel-clad composition, which set the stage for the era in which the 1973 Kennedy half-dollar was produced. And by 1973, the coin was no longer made for general circulation in the same way as earlier years, because public interest in saving half-dollars rather than spending them caused the denomination to largely disappear from everyday commerce. And this decision led the Mint to strike most Kennedy half-dollars specifically for collectors through mint sets, rather than for banks and general circulation. And the 1973 Kennedy half-dollar, therefore, represents a collector-focused issue rather than a widely circulated coin, and in that year, the United States Mint produced Kennedy half-dollars at both the Philadelphia Mint and the Denver Mint with no proof struck for public sale because proof coins were temporarily suspended that year, making 1973 especially unique in the series. And this absence of proof coins has made the regular mint set examples from 1973 more significant to collectors who seek completeness in their collections, and the obverse of the 1973 Kennedy half-dollar features the familiar left-facing portrait of President Kennedy designed by Gilroy Roberts, capturing a calm and dignified expression that had already become iconic. By that time, while the reverse designed by Frank Gasparo displays the presidential coat of arms with an eagle holding an olive branch, and arrows symbolizing peace and strength surrounded by stars representing the states, and the lettering and overall design remained unchanged from previous years, reinforcing the idea that the Kennedy half-dollar had become a stable and enduring tribute rather than a temporary memorial. And the historical context of 1973 adds another layer of meaning to the coin as the United States was dealing with inflation, the oil crisis, the aftermath of the Vietnam War, and a growing sense of distrust in government institutions following political scandals. And during such a time, the Kennedy half-dollar served as a quiet reminder of idealism, hope, and leadership that many Americans associated with the early 1960s, and although the coin did not circulate widely, its existence in mint sets allowed collectors to preserve a tangible connection to that earlier era. And the 1973 Kennedy half-dollar is also notable for its quality, because mint-set coins from this period often exhibit strong strikes and attractive surfaces compared to heavily circulated coins of earlier decades, making them appealing to both beginner and advanced collectors. And while the coin is not considered rare in absolute terms, its limited method of distribution and lack of proof versions give it a distinct place within the Kennedy half-dollar series, and over time, collectors have come to appreciate the 1973 issue not for high silver value or dramatic design changes, but for its role in marking the transition of the half-dollar from a circulating workhorse to a largely symbolic and collectible denomination. And today, the 1973 Kennedy half-dollar continues to be studied, collected, and discussed by numismatists who view it as a snapshot of a changing America, an era when coins began to reflect not just economic function but memory, identity, and legacy. And as collectors hold a 1973 Kennedy half-dollar, they are holding more than a piece of metal. They are holding a story of national mourning adaptation, economic pressure, and enduring respect for a president whose image continues to live on through one of the most recognizable coins in United States history. As the story of the 1973 Kennedy half-dollar moves forward, it becomes clear that this coin quietly reflects the changing relationship between Americans and their money, because by the early 1970s, cash coins were no longer seen only as tools for daily trade, but also as objects of saving, collecting, and emotional attachment. And the half-dollar in particular had become a coin people preferred to keep rather than spend, which explains why banks rarely ordered them and why the mint responded by focusing production on collector mint sets. And this shift meant that the 1973 Kennedy half-dollar lived most of its life protected inside cellophane packaging rather than jingling in pockets or passing through countless hands. And this preservation has allowed many examples to survive in remarkably high condition, offering a clear view of the craftsmanship of the era. And examining these coins today reveals the precise details of Kennedy's hair, the sharp lines of the eagle's feathers, and the bold lettering that speaks to the mint's technical standards during that time and beyond its physical qualities. The coin also represents a psychological transition because the nation was moving away from the optimism of the Kennedy years into a more cautious and uncertain period marked by economic stress, rising prices, and public doubt. And in this environment, the Kennedy half-dollar functioned almost like a keepsake, a reminder of leadership, youth, and promise from a decade that felt distant, yet deeply missed. And collectors who acquired mint sets in 1973 may not have realized they were preserving a historical marker rather than simply buying an annual set of coins. And over the decades, interest in the Kennedy half-dollar series has steadily grown as new generations of collectors rediscover the coin and seek out dates like 1973 that tell a subtle but important story. And numismatists often point out that the absence of proof coins that year adds a layer of intrigue because it makes the mint set versions the best available examples for the date, and this scarcity of format rather than quantity creates a unique collecting challenge and places the 1973 Kennedy half-dollar in a category all its own. And as time passes, the coin has also gained attention from historians who view everyday objects like coins as cultural documents capable of revealing how a society remembers its leaders and responds to change. And in that sense, the 1973 Kennedy half-dollar is not just a continuation of a series, but a symbol of endurance, showing how an image born from tragedy became a permanent part of American identity. And even today, when half-dollars are rarely used, the Kennedy design continues to be struck, proving that the legacy it represents still holds meaning. And as collectors and viewers reflect on the 1973 issue, they begin to see it not as an ordinary clad coin, but as a quiet witness to history, one that bridges the hopeful early 60s and the complex realities of the 70s, and preserves the memory of a president whose influence extended far beyond his brief time in office. As decades passed, the 1973 Kennedy half-dollar slowly transformed from a modern collector issue into a historical artifact because time itself added weight to its story, and what once felt contemporary became reflective and archival, and collectors, who opened mint sets years later, began to realize that these coins carried untouched evidence of a specific moment in American history, frozen in metal and plastic. And the fact that so many 1973 Kennedy half-dollars survived in high-grade condition created an unusual situation where availability did not equal insignificance, because value in numismatics is not only about rarity, but about context, purpose, and meaning. And the 1973 issue perfectly illustrates this idea as it symbolizes the moment when the half-dollar effectively exited everyday life and entered the realm of symbolism, memory and collection, and historians studying monetary circulation patterns often cite the early 1970s as the era when Americans emotionally detached from large denomination coins and preferred paper currency and smaller coins for convenience, and this behavioral shift sealed the fate of the half-dollar as a coin of ceremony rather than commerce and Yet the Mint continued striking it year after year because removing Kennedy's image would have felt like erasing a national tribute, and so the 1973 Kennedy half-dollar stands as proof of that commitment, a coin created not because the economy demanded it, but because remembrance required it. And within collector communities, the year 1973 is often discussed as a turning point, where the Kennedy series fully settled into its modern identity, no longer experimental, no longer silver-based, but firmly established as a long-term memorial series, and advanced collectors examining die characteristics and strike quality of the 1973 coins have noted subtle variations that reveal how the Mint balanced efficiency with quality during a time of budget pressure and high demand for other denominations, and these technical details add another layer of fascination for those who study the coin closely because they show the human decisions behind mass production and beyond the technical and economic aspects. The cultural meaning of the Kennedy half-dollar continued to evolve as new generations learned about President Kennedy, not through personal memory, but through textbooks, documentaries, and family stories. And for them, the coin became a tangible educational object, something they could hold while learning about the Cold War, the space race, civil rights, and political idealism, and in this way, the 1973 Kennedy half-dollar helped transmit history across generations. Without words serving as a silent storyteller that required curiosity to unlock its full meaning, and even today, when collectors assemble full-date runs, the inclusion of 1973 often sparks discussion because it reminds them of the unusual year with no proofs and limited distribution, reinforcing the idea that history does not always move in straight, predictable lines, and as time continues forward, the 1973 Kennedy half-dollar grows increasingly distant from its year of issue, yet closer to the heart of American numismatic history, embodying remembrance, transition, and continuity all at once, and standing as a quiet, enduring link between a president, a people, and the changing role of money itself. As the years moved further away from 1973, the Kennedy half-dollar from that year began to take on a new identity shaped not by circulation or spending, but by memory preservation and storytelling, because coins like this often survive longer than documents, newspapers, or even photographs, and the 1973 Kennedy half-dollar became a durable witness to an era when America was redefining itself politically, economically, and socially, and collectors who revisit this coin decades later often describe a sense of stillness in its design because, unlike many other denominations that experienced redesigns, the Kennedy half-dollar remained visually unchanged, and that consistency itself tells a story of respect and permanence. And in the broader scope of United States coinage history, the decision to keep Kennedy's portrait untouched year after year reflects how deeply his image had become embedded in national consciousness, and the 1973 issue sits quietly in the middle of this long, uninterrupted run, acting as a midpoint between the emotional shock of the 1960s and the commemorative normalcy that followed, and during the late 20th century, when coin collecting experienced waves of renewed interest, many enthusiasts began re-evaluating modern coins and discovered that years like 1973 held significance precisely because they lacked dramatic features like silver content or proof finishes, and instead represented institutional choices about what the nation chose to remember and how, and museums and educational collections later included Kennedy half-dollars from the early 70s to illustrate how a coin can function as both legal tender and cultural artifact, and when viewed alongside other objects from the same period, the 1973 Kennedy half-dollar helps paint a fuller picture of American life during a time of energy shortages, political tension, and shifting public trust. And yet, despite those challenges, The continued production of this coin sent a subtle message of continuity and stability, suggesting that while policies and leaders change, certain symbols remain constant. And for many families, the Kennedy half-dollar passed quietly from parents to children, tucked away in drawers, albums, or envelopes, not because it was valuable in money terms, but because it carried emotional weight. And over time, these personal acts of saving transformed millions of individual coins into a collective archive of remembrance. And as numismatic research continues, scholars increasingly acknowledge the importance of studying such modern issues to understand public sentiment and institutional decision-making, and the 1973 Kennedy half-dollar stands out in this research as a coin that was produced without urgency, without hype, and without expectation of circulation, yet with a clear purpose of preservation and legacy. And as the years continue to pass, its role only deepens, shifting further from currency and closer to historical testimony. And in this way, the 1973 Kennedy half-dollar remains a silent companion to history, carrying forward the image of a president and the complex story of a nation learning to remember through metal.